A young man stood nervously at the edge of a crowded marketplace, his heart pounding as he watched the auctioneer prepare for yet another sale. Today wasn't just another ordinary day. This day would change his life forever. Like the many before him, he stood tall, with his hands bound by rough leather straps, his face hidden beneath the brim of his worn-out hat. He could hear the rich men whispering to each other, bidding on his labor, bidding on his future, his soul for sale. And he would be sold to the highest bidder, a commodity to be used and discarded as needed. A smile crossed the auctioneer's face as he turned to the crowd with a twinkle in his eye. As she approached him, she gently untied the leather straps that bound his wrists and looked him in the eye with a sense of understanding. She didn't speak at first. She just stood there for a moment, looking at him as if trying to read the story behind his tired eyes. Then she smiled a soft smile, one that was filled with both empathy and hope. He nodded in agreement and raised the gavel in the air. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the woman made her offer. The sprawling fields. The widow treated him with kindness and respect, something he wasn't used to. He worked the land as he had always done, but now there was something different in his heart, a sense of purpose and dignity that had been missing for so long. Each day he learned more about the widow and her life. He admired her strength, her intelligence, and her unwavering determination to build a better life for herself and others. But he also saw the vulnerability beneath her tough exterior. He understood her pain and her longing for something more, just as he longed for the freedom to live on his own terms. She had built this estate with her own hands after her husband's passing, and though she was wealthy, she was not arrogant or cruel. For the first time, he spoke what had been on his heart for so long. "But I would be honored to build it with you." Her words filled him with hope and joy as he realized that the life he had once dreamed of was now within his reach. With her by his side, "I want to build a life with you," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Not just for me, but for both of us." She was a woman of strength and compassion who had fought for her place in the world just as he had. This was a far cry from the barren land he had once called home. They worked tirelessly, side by side, to grow the land and expand the estate. A life of love, hard work, and the freedom to build something that would last forever. Their love for each other grew stronger with each passing day, and their bond became unbreakable. She told him about the dreams she had for the future of the estate and for the people who worked there. She spoke of her desire to help others escape the cycle of poverty and servitude that she had herself once experienced. The young rancher listened intently to her words, and for the first time in his life, he felt truly seen. The widow led him to a modest room in the servants' quarters, where he could rest and recover from the long journey. He thanked her quietly, but she only nodded and left him to his thoughts. Without hesitation, the young rancher's heart skipped a beat. He had no idea what was happening, but he knew one thing for sure: she had come to his rescue. The sound of the gavel striking the wood echoed through the marketplace, signaling the end of the auction and the beginning of a new chapter in his life. A life filled with dignity and purpose. Together, they began to plan for the future of the estate and for the land that would one day be his. He knew that he had found something special in this woman, someone who believed in him when no one else had. And as they worked side by side, day after day, he felt a bond growing between them, something that was deeper than just employer and servant. In the background, the crowd murmured with excitement, some curious, others indifferent, but none of them truly saw him. None of them understood the weight of the moment or the crushing despair that he felt. You're free now. This was his life now, a life of servitude and hardship, no different than the generations before him. He had been sold before, but never like this. He didn't know where she was taking him or what she wanted from him, but for the first time in years, he felt like there might be a way out of the life he had known. Never by someone who seemed to care about his well-being. He had heard stories of wealthy widows who took in ranch hands and treated them as little more than tools to maintain their estates. But there was something different about this woman, something that made him believe there was more to her than the rumors he had heard. She didn't speak much during the ride, but the silence was comfortable. He felt no fear in her presence, only a strange sense of calm that he hadn't known in years. The confusion in his mind was palpable, but there was a flicker of hope deep down, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Was this the escape he had been dreaming of? His eyes were barely visible as he glanced up at the buyers, his stomach twisted with dread. It was a woman's voice, firm and commanding. She stepped forward with grace and confidence, her dark hair flowing behind her, and her eyes sharp with determination. She was a widow who had recently inherited her late husband's estate. Her beauty was striking, but it was her presence that commanded attention. She was not like the other women in the crowd. She had a purpose and a fire in her eyes that was unlike anything the young rancher had ever seen. This was a moment he had prayed wouldn't come, but it had come nonetheless. The cruel reality of his situation had been sealed years ago when his parents passed away, leaving him with nothing but the land that had once belonged to his family. There was no escaping the life of a rancher, one born into debt, bound by the land, and forced to sell everything he owned to survive. He had worked tirelessly day after day, only to find that the land was no longer enough to pay off the debts that kept piling up. And now, as he stood there being sold like cattle, he couldn't help but wonder how he had gotten to this point. His dreams of freedom felt distant and unreachable. The hope of ever owning his own land and building a life of his own seemed like a fairy tale. Just as the auctioneer was about to call for the final bid, a sharp voice rang out from the back of the crowd, causing everyone to pause. The woman stepped up to the auctioneer and whispered something in his ear. The woman walked over to the young rancher, her steps sure and purposeful. "I've just bought you," she said, her voice calm but powerful. The young rancher stood there, frozen for a moment, unsure of what to say. With a nod, he followed her to her carriage. His mind raced with questions. As they traveled through the countryside, the young rancher couldn't help but wonder what his new life would be like. When they arrived at her estate, the young rancher was taken aback by its size and beauty. Over the next few days, the rancher worked alongside the other staff on the estate, but it was clear that he wasn't just another servant. One evening, as they sat by the fire, she spoke to him about her life, her struggles, and the losses she had faced in her own journey. He realized that she had not bought him to use him for her own gain, but to offer him a chance at a new life. It wasn't long before the young rancher realized that he had fallen in love with her. One evening, as they stood together, overlooking the land she had fought so hard to claim for herself, he took her hand in his and looked into her eyes. The widow smiled and squeezed his hand. "I've already built something here," she said softly. As the years passed, the rancher and the widow built a life together on the estate. One fateful day, as they stood together, looking out at the fields that had once seemed so far out of reach, The young rancher knew that this was the life he had always dreamed of.